find a seat. My name is Danielle Verstegen, and indeed I'm going to try to explain to you how we did problem-based learning in a MOOC about problem-based learning, but I'm going to try to focus on what we saw happening in teams collaborating in our MOOC today. So I'll say a few words about the design of the MOOC, but I'll try to be short, otherwise my time will be spent. You see the pictures of my co-authors here, Herke Fontaine, Amber Daly, Geraldine Clarabout and Annemie Sprout. My colleagues who were most involved in the MOOC, but there were many more, and I'll show you a long list at the end. So this is where it started about a year ago. We are known at Maastricht for doing problem-based learning face-to-face, so when we wanted to gain some experience with MOOCs, it seemed a suitable topic. But then we thought it would be silly to teach problem-based learning in any other way than problem-based learning. In a MOOC, that posed us a challenge because we didn't want this. We wanted this. We wanted people to work in teams based on discussions around authentic problems in a MOOC. Very briefly, this is what we tried. We designed a set of problems, some about learning with PBL, learning processes, some about designing PBL courses, some about managing PBL curricula. And in the MOOC, we asked people to form teams to study those problems, discuss, do some self-study, and come back and report what they found. We found a platform that supported team formation and provided all the teams with their own team space. We did give them a few steps of these are the activities that we expect you to do, but we did not tell our teams how to do that. So they were free in choosing their own ways of communicating and collaborating. Some communicated synchronously, some asynchronously, and they used a variety of tools, as we will see later. So in the end, we thought it looked pretty much like problem-based learning does face-to-face, groups of students studying problems, with two big differences. These teams were working online, they were virtual teams, and they had no tutor. And that's a big one, but we didn't feel we could scale up the idea of having a private tutor for each team in a MOOC. So we had facilitators who gave some general feedback, but other than that, the teams were on their own. Some brief statistics. We started with about 3,000 participants, about 800 of them became active in teams, and about 10% in the end finished the course, which is fairly normal, I believe, in MOOC world. There were 109 groups. Most of those were formed by the participants themselves. We did form a number of groups out of the participants who had filled in a full profile but did not get into teams, but I'll tell you in advance that most of those teams failed. We were happy to see, though, that about half of the teams in the end finished the course. So apparently it didn't do much harm, at least. We asked participants what they felt and experienced at various times during the MOOC, and we got very positive responses, some of them here. We're happy that they learned a lot, but we're probably even happier that they felt that this MOOC encouraged them to interact with fellow students, because that's what we set out to do. And of course, that's not the whole story, because those very positive reactions were of the people that participated actively. There were, as you remember, large numbers of people who never really became active, probably for very good reasons, probably because they didn't have time or they weren't really interested. There was also a smaller group of people who would have liked to be more active, but somehow didn't manage to find the right team for them or didn't manage to participate as they had wanted. And that's the group that we are most worried about. That's not what I was going to talk to about today, but Just a few words about the assignments. All the assignments in our MOOC were group assignments. There was no formal assessment of those assignments, but what we did is that we asked the people who had designed the tasks to have a look and to tell us something about the quality of the assignments that were handed in. What they told us was obviously that the quality varied a lot. Some of the teams, it was obvious that they hadn't taken their task very seriously and had only done a very superficial job. But the better assignments were a lot better than we had even expected. Just because I'm so enthusiastic, I'll show you some examples because I want to talk about it. We had a team of language teachers actually coming from all over the world who ended the course with their joint handbook of problem-based learning in language teaching. Fabulous. They even compared problem-based learning and other formats to contemporary artworks, something that I would have never thought of if I had been tutoring them. We had a group of Brazilian teachers who ended the course pretending that they had the task to teach their own colleagues about problem-based learning. So they set themselves a new problem to design training for their colleagues, and they did. So wonderful things that were in my more daring moments. I think maybe these teams were better off without a tutor, because they went far beyond anything that we would have thought of probably if we had been tutoring them. Something now about what happened in those groups. And here you will see that I go over to a completely different line of research. We did very qualitative research to actually see how those teams collaborated, communicated. We selected about 20 of them and we asked their permission to silently observe how they were working throughout the course. So we logged in regularly and we filled in weekly observation forms. We saved their assignments. We summarized at the end for each team what the main observations were, and we came together as researchers to discuss what struck us most. One of the things that struck us most was that these teams collaborate and communicate in very different ways, and we wanted to get more to grasps with that. So we purposefully selected 5 teams that work in very different ways, but that were all effective. And we coded their team chats using a coding scheme that we had developed based on our own emerging themes. And I'll share some of the things that we saw in those 5 or also in those 20 teams. First of all, we saw that the first weeks of our course were kind of messy. This is the team formation stage, where people joined, people dropped out, people weren't sure about each other, about what they were doing, what they could do. After the first 3 weeks, the teams seem fairly stable. They shrink a little bit, but not very much. What we also saw is that the teams had very different ways to deal with people that were members of the teams but weren't actually contributing. Some of the teams just accepted this and left them in. And some of the teams actively removed inactive members from their team. Another thing that we saw is that obviously if you work online in a virtual team, especially if you work with people that you've never met before, you need to organize how you communicate and collaborate. And it looked like most of our teams had not thought about this in advance. And maybe we as MOOC designers had not thought enough about this in advance. What we saw is that in some teams it worked well because they had a strong leader who led throughout the course and just divided out tasks and roles. In other teams there was a rotating leadership. But in both of those cases, it seemed to work out well if they talked about this explicitly. If in the chat they would say, hey, how are you, who's doing this week? I'm going to hand in the assignment. How about we make this plan? That seemed to be good. What we also saw is that it really helped if there was a positive atmosphere, where people just said, thank you for doing that, great contribution, things like that that seem not to say much, but it did really help. What I didn't tell you, this is an intermezzo, beforehand, is that we asked our teams to fill in a team charter in the first week, where they were stimulated to think about this a little bit. So we asked them to divide responsibilities, to think about how they would communicate and what they expected. What we saw throughout the MOOC is that almost none of the teams kept to their team charter. But some teams, interestingly, kept on rediscussing this. And that triggered us. Well, I talked about how we saw that teams had very different ways of approaching tasks. Some divided tasks out and just merged then what they had found. It helped, again, if they made explicit who was supposed to do that, to do what. It also helped if they stimulated each other and if they accepted that not everybody was able to participate to the same extent. Some participants had language trouble. Not everybody was a native English speaker. Some had technical problems. Some were in African countries where the internet didn't work always. Some were on holidays and couldn't participate for 1 or 2 weeks. It helped if the team was just able to deal with that and accept that. What we were a bit disappointed with is that we felt that there wasn't enough elaboration or discussion or co-creation of knowledge. But I think it's a separate talk to go into that. If you want to know about it, I'll be happy to talk about it later. Well, they used very different tools. Some were very conservative, used Google Docs and Skype, and that was it. Some were very creative. The teams that worked very well were the teams that experimented with different tools and helped each other, explained how to work with Padlet walls or concept mapping tools or anything else that they thought of. I'm going to skip quickly over this. We saw that there was some exchange between teams. We asked them to give peer feedback to the assignments of other teams. There were some general discussion fora. Some people felt that was the most important part of the MOOC for them. Some others just ignored it blatantly. Then we saw that they rarely ever discussed a MOOC design, so that I can't say very much about that, really. Some last thoughts about how we think we might help our teams better in the next run. We've thought of various ways to actively support the formation of reformation of teams, especially for those people who found it difficult. Some of those solutions are technical. We could think about algorithms, trying to detect people that have those troubles and assign them to certain teams. We also thought of very simple things like opening a discussion forum for people who are looking for a team, which is a very simple solution. We also asked, and this is because of what we saw happening in some of those teams, we plan in the next run to ask all the teams to review their team charter explicitly after 3 weeks. After those first messy weeks, when the team has sort of stabilized, review your team charter and discuss it again. Then we thought we could illustrate potential ways to collaborate and potential tools that you could use, and we're thinking of using the the observations that we've done now of the teams that we have observed for that purpose. And we thought of various ways to stimulate more elaboration and discussion, because that we feel is the core of problem-based learning. So that's something that we need to do. That completes my talk for today. There's the whole list of people working on this project, and probably have even forgotten people there. Thank you.
Okay, we take 5 minutes for questions to Danielle. Who wants to ask something?
Yeah. When you had a silent observer watching the groups, did you have a rubric that they used for keeping track of the atmosphere in the group? And were there key things that they were looking for, or did they just observe and report back their observations?
We had an observation form that we used, but that was mostly based on things like what's happening in the group, how much are people, who's participating, who's not participating this week, how did they divide the roles, are they still following the team charter, what tools are they using? Those were the questions on that first observation form. The thing about the positive atmosphere is something that came up later, that we observed afterwards, that came out of. I don't think we had expected that to play such a big role.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Martha, you go. I'll follow you now.
You mentioned earlier that you'd like to see perhaps you should have spent more time organizing the groups themselves, but I mean, it seems to me you had a team charter, you had thought these things through. Can you expand a little bit more on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think we had thought this through, and it was, we on purpose decided not to prescribe teams how to work, because we had no idea what would be a good way ourselves, basically. And we also thought that there wouldn't be one best way, and this is something that we indeed observed. And we had thought of the team charter as something important. That actually came out of a pilot study, a smaller scale pilot study that we did before. I think we still hadn't thought enough about the fact that we're actually giving people a double task in this MOOC. We're giving them a task to study the content of the MOOC, but we're also giving them the task to find a good way to collaborate online in a virtual team. And what we probably had not expected was that 80% of the active participants here indicated that this was their first MOOC. So we had a lot of people that were not really that tech savvy participating.
Okay, time for one last question.
You mentioned that you had some disappointment that there wasn't much co-creation of knowledge. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I showed you some very nice examples of assignments that we saw. We also saw that there was quite a large group of assignments that was maybe just a combination of contributions of single people, where they hadn't taken a lot of time to integrate that or to discuss, I found this, you found that, how do we combine that, how does that match? To be honest, this is also difficult in face-to-face groups, as I experience every time I'm tutoring a face-to-face group. So it's probably not really unexpected, especially because they didn't have a tutor. We still feel that we need to stimulate that more, because that is the core of problem-based learning. So it's maybe not very unexpected, but it is something that we want to work on.
Okay, thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mike Sharples. Mike is Professor of Education Technology at the Open University in the UK, and he's also the academic lead of FutureLearn. And Mike will share experiences about the introduction also of MOOC features into the platform FutureLearn.
If I can find out how to get to it. Can you see how to get back to the desktop? Oh, okay. So it's that one. Okay, thank you. So I'll be continuing the theme of team learning, but from a design perspective. So I'm, as Marco said, part seconded to FutureLearn as academic lead, and part of that role is to work with the learning experience team in FutureLearn on the design of new functionality for the platform. So this work is very much carried out in collaboration with the learning experience team, led by Laura Kersop, but also with Alako Matova, who is a talented interaction designer, and other people in that team. So a little bit of background for those of you who may not know FutureLearn. FutureLearn was designed as a platform on an explicit pedagogy of social constructivist learning, of learning through conversation. And we've tried to repeat and to extend that through all of the design of our platform. So some of the basic principles: the learners are volunteers. We're not pushing anybody into learning on the platform. They are very much self-directed learners, so we need to support their learning goals and their learning journeys. We need to recommend rather than to require them to take courses, although we are developing some more courses for professional development that will have more of an element of requiring, but most of our courses we recommend rather than require. And social learning, so learning with other people, is central to the platform, but it should also be possible to complete the course without being social. About a third to 40 to 50% of people, depending on the course, actively engage in conversation, in discussion. We know that many more learn vicariously. They learn by reading or by watching other people's conversations. But one of the issues with FutureLearn was that we had developed this social learning model, but the one thing that was lacking from it was the ability to learn in small groups. And we knew that the learners wanted this because we have the learner voice, which is the learner feedback from the people who take part in the FutureLearn courses. And they were saying, it's great that we can have these massive scale discussions, sometimes with 15,000 comments or more on every single bit of content, but we also want to have more intimate conversations. So they were asking for it, and we knew as learning designers that we wanted to provide it. We wanted to provide this different way of small group learning. We also know from the research what works and what doesn't work. So, and there have been a number of studies. Johnson & Johnson is a good starting point. An educational psychology success story, social interdependence theory, and cooperative learning. We know that groups work when learners set group goals, when they know when and how they're expected to contribute, when they share their knowledge, experience, and perspectives, when it starts from their own understanding, when they're able to learn from more knowledgeable peers, when they share the rewards of the group performance, and when they're able to reflect on their progress. And we know that groups don't work when people are forced to join them, when one person dominates that group, and when people don't contribute. There's nothing worse than having a group with only 3 or 4 people out of 20 contributing and the others feeling resentful. So, we wanted to provide a group experience that firstly gave a low barrier to entry. We'd seen some other group and team learning on other platforms, and it seemed that there was too high a barrier to entry. You had to decide in advance which group you were going to go into, which type of group, and make a commitment to work with that team for the entire course. So we wanted a lower barrier to entry. We wanted to enable diversity for people to bring different perspectives, to promote active conversations, and to include well-structured activities. So we had some design decisions to make, and this was one of the tables that we use to try and help us make those design decisions. So across the top is the granularity. So the smallest type of group could be groups talking about a particular piece of content. In FutureLearn, it's called a step, so a video or a piece of text. And for each of those, you could have either synchronous, so real-time discussion of content, or you could have asynchronous, small group comments and responses to content. Then going up the scale, you could have discussions in groups about a broader activity. For instance, a live chat about a big question during the course. So the educator could set a big question and then have groups discuss that. Or, as you've just heard, we could have team learning. So where for an extended period of time, you form a team to try and satisfy a particular goal on the course. Or at the bigger scale, you could have a synchronous course chat area, or you could have educator-initiated small group discussions that last throughout the course. And we evaluated some of those different possibilities. The one we came to first was, wouldn't it be great to have synchronous discussions about particular pieces of content? Because we already had large-scale discussions around individual pieces of content. How about small group discussions? And so one of the things we looked at was, how many people are there on the platform at any particular time? And we were surprised. With a typical course of about 10,000 to 15,000 people, the number of people who are actively engaged in that platform at any 15-minute period was about 6. That surprised us, because I'd assume there would be at least sort of 50, 100 people at any one time engaged. If we wanted to form small groups around a piece of content, then we were working on what we call the bus model, that people would line up and when there were enough people, the group would start. But for enough people to line up and take part in a discussion about a particular piece of content, you'd probably need to wait for an hour or an hour and a half. So that was one that reluctantly we had to reject. And so these were the possibilities. So for synchronous content or activity type discussions, there were just too few learners available. The problem with synchronous course-based discussions, they were too broad. You would have off-topic conversations. Asynchronous content-based ones were too similar to FutureLearn comments and replies. And as I said, for the asynchronous activity-based, the team-based learning, we felt there was too high a barrier to entry. So what we went for was the educator-initiated small group discussions, which we call study groups, that last throughout a course and have very low barrier to entry. So there were some other decisions, like how do you join the group, how do you allocate people to the group, and how do you facilitate them? And we, to some extent, based it on our own intuition, but also on previous research. So we made joining entirely voluntary, because that was in keeping with the FutureLearn platform. In terms of allocation, we essentially used Occam's razor, which is you start with the simplest possible solution. And the simplest possible solution was allocating people randomly to groups, because we didn't really have any other reason to provide different sorts of allocation. And in terms of facilitation, we knew from previous research that we needed structure. And so we wanted to have a strong educator voice in the group design. So that's what it looks like. And I'm just going to explain a little bit more now about how it works. So it's actually, continuing the Dutch theme, it's a course, an introduction to Dutch. So the Dutch people will be able to read it, but nobody else can, which was partly deliberate. So the discussions are in parallel to the main course. And at the start of the course, a learner is prompted, encouraged to join a group. The learner clicks the Study Groups tab, and it's a bit like one-click ordering in Amazon. You are automatically put into a group of around 30 learners based on recency. And you remain in this group throughout the course unless you click Leave the Group. And you can post and reply to and like comments within that group environment. The educator has a strong role, so the educator can broadcast a prompt to all of the groups on the course. And you can see that there, the educators broadcast a prompt, which could be a task for that week, it could be a big question to answer, it could be some sort of provocation to take part in a debate, for example. The educator can see the list of all the groups and the basic activity and can enter any group to see the conversation and to post or reply or like, so the educator can become a member of the group at any point. And they're identified there with a tag indicating their role. So the educator has a strong role, or other facilitators, so other people on the course can join that group to contribute towards it. So at the top you see the group members. Because you're limited by space, you have to scroll through to see all the members of the group, but all the group members are identified. You can go to their profiles. You have at any point the option to leave a group, and we make leaving a group fairly easy, not quite as easy as joining a group, but fairly easy. And there are a number of decisions to make about, do you leave the trace of the person's contributions when they leave the group? And we decided we would, but obviously when they come back, they will join a different group, and they will be randomly allocated to another group. They can add to the group discussion. There are broadcast educator prompts, there are learner contributions, and educator responses. So that's the basic structure of a group in FutureLearn. So we then carried out an evaluation. So we didn't open it up immediately to all of the courses on the platform. We did a trial with 12 courses across the spectrum of different subject areas. We did interviews over Skype with 8 learners. We carried out a micro-survey in the second week of the course, so an online survey from volunteers, and had 856 responses to that. And we did a detailed survey of learners who had completed 10% or more of the course, with 1,862 learners. So we had a fair amount of data on which to base our evaluation of the first trial. And we did interviews with representatives from 9 of the 12 course teams. And this is what we found. Firstly, successes. So the learners and the course teams really did see the opportunity to enhance the learning experience. They wanted groups and they wanted to make them work. Most learners had no preferences on who they were grouped with, so random allocation seems to be just fine. We didn't have any other basis, we still don't have any other basis for allocating people to groups. If we go on and implement, for instance, team-based learning at a future date, we may think differently, but at the moment, random allocation seems to work just fine. Learners liked interacting with a group of peers, and learners liked when educators made contributions. They liked educators both to post the big questions, but also to engage in the group discussions, because we weren't sure whether the learners would like the educators butting into those groups, but they did. The things that weren't so good. The main thing that dogs all group discussion online is frustration when the discussion decreases. And this was no exception. For those groups where the discussion starts off animated and then tails away, there was a lot of frustration. And what we found was that the learners needed direction on how to work in groups. And so did the educators as well. So they needed guidance on how to work effectively in groups. In particular, what tended to happen on the trial courses was that the educators would say, introduce yourself. And the learners would introduce themselves, and then nothing else would happen. The discussion would trail away. So it's not enough just to tell learners to introduce yourself. You've got to give them some clear topic-based activity to get started on right at the beginning. And course teams then needed guidance on designing learning for study groups. For example, jigsaw learning, where different groups have a different part of the task. And then they post their responses or their conclusions from that task on a larger discussion stream on the FutureLearn platform. And course teams want a better view of group activity and where to intervene. They want better dashboards. And more generally, both learners and educators need more structure and guidance. And I'm just going to show you a glimpse of where we're going next, which is to provide that sort of structure and guidance. So this is literally yesterday, which is what our initial designs are for the educator dashboard. So that you can see there the group activity in general throughout a week, but for each group you can see what's called spark diagrams, where you get an idea of which, it's a bit like sort of trend graphs for share prices. You can see at a glance which groups are tailing off, which group the activity is increasing. You can see the active members and who's left. So you've got a dashboard for the educator that gives you some idea of where to intervene and where you can have most effect. So that's what we're trying to do, to provide the learners with more structure, the educators with better dashboards, and to give both learners and educators better guidance on how to use groups effectively. Thank you.
Questions? Over there.
I was wondering if you could talk more about the prompts, the teacher prompts. Were any of them multimedia, or what was the nature of those?
No, the prompts could have been multimedia because you can embed media into those, so there is a markup language that allows you to. For the trial, no, the educators tended to do very short textual prompts. And as I say, for some of the trial, the first prompts were introduce yourself. And that was not particularly successful. What I think you need to do is to say introduce yourself, and then here's a big question for you to answer, or here's the topic for week 1, I want you to discuss an aspect of that. And to have very, very clear guidance, not just about what the broad topic area is, but what you're expected to do in your discussion. One of the areas we really want to look at further is giving a topic for the groups to discuss and then to share more generally on the platform in a discussion step with all of the participants in the course. And we hope that that'll have 2 benefits. One, it'll give a focus for the group with a clear group output into that discussion, but also benefit the other learners because they will see the results of each of the group's discussions.
Thank you for your talk. It's interesting. So I'm thinking if we are going to use this small group discussion in a MOOC, like with tens of thousands of students, do you think it will be like equally effective, or it may cause some more challenges because it's hard to manage like a lot of stuff?
So all these courses did have these trials were with courses with tens of thousands of students. So these were real MOOC courses, each one with typically 10 to 20,000 students on. So the trials were not just with a small group of volunteers. These were on actual courses with 10 to 20,000 people. And the number of groups on each course varied between about 40, so each group had 30 people in it, and the number of groups were between, I think, 40 and about 200 groups on each course. So these were trials with real MOOC courses.
And we don't really have like a lot of instructors to monitor them. They are pretty much on their own.
So in terms of instructors and educators, as we call them, you would normally have a lead educator, and then you would have facilitators who might be PhD students, not for each group, but for each course, which is one of the reasons why we need to have these dashboards, because they tend to work in relays, and when another group of facilitators comes on, say each day there is a different group of PhD students or whatever, they need to see at a glance where they can come in and be most effective. So they can then intervene in groups, for instance, where the activity seems to be tailing off, or where people are starting to leave the group.
So, really interesting, and many of these challenges are shared by discussion forums, such as, or suggestions, such as move beyond, introduce yourself, or the need for better data. Can you estimate the impact that this had on participation and quality of discussions compared against discussion forums?
So obviously we hoped that having small groups would really boost participation rates. For the trials, it didn't happen. Having groups on the platform didn't radically boost participation and retention rates. But it's early days. I think part of the issue was that for many of the groups, or many of the courses, the groups weren't well structured. The tasks they were given were not well conceived. And so It's far too early at the moment to say whether it is going to have an effect on retention. What I know from other research, for instance, from the NovoEd platform, they say that for team-based learning, which is a little bit different, the people who join teams are far more likely to complete. But then you're not sure whether that's cause or effect, whether it's the more active people join teams or teams cause them to be more active. So it's still very much an open question as to whether small group learning is going to improve participation rates, and there's so many other factors. So we're looking at, obviously we did comparisons with multiple runs of courses, so first run and then a second run where we had small groups on, and so far there hasn't been any major findings that we can report. It's still early days.
Okay, I would like to ask you to keep the question for the final round, then we can have the next presenter. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
I just realized that we have been also, and this year we've been still valid to say a European track here. So the next speaker is coming from the National Distance Education University UNED in Spain. It's Manuel Castro, and he will report, this is the more authentic learning experiences, about a virtual laboratory and the challenges to scale that up in a MOOC environment.
Hello, my name is Manuel Castro. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I work in the Spanish University for Distance Education. I work in distance, and we work in online learning inside the engineering side of the university. And we start some 5 years ago to think about to try to put practical competences in the distance learning activities. We put it in a lot of remote labs. We have a lot of virtual and remote labs, and we try to do in a more massive environment there. Why we start to do that is because we need to try to have this kind of satisfactory experimental experiences to the students in a remote learning environment. One of the major problems we have is to try to be in a massive environment, of course. If you have a remote lab, I will talk a little bit about this later on, but a remote lab is a place where you can have exactly the same experience because you are working with remote and real equipment in the other side of the equipment. And when you are working with this, you can have or only for you all the equipment, or you can share depending the activity of the lab. But it never was trying to do in a massive environment this kind of things there. We have a lab, the name is VISIR, I will talk a bit later too, for practical in electronics environment, and this will try to test if this kind of lab is good or not, to try this kind of competences or practical competence there. And the last part is try to check with the students if this kind of complex systems will be really useful if you like to work in a real environment there. What's a remote lab? As I told you, remote lab is a tool, an equipment that has in the other part of the internet connection and allowing the students to have exactly the same working as a real equipment, because this is a real equipment. You don't have a virtual interface, you don't have a virtual simulator, you have a real lab that is in the other side of your computer and you are working with it through internet. The main advantage is that kind of labs is exactly the same one that the online, the personal, the face-to-face labs, and they are always available. They are 100% available all the day, night, and so on. There is no temporal, no geographical restrictions to access the system there. And the main disadvantages of this kind of systems is that the maintenance used to be a problem because you are disconnecting the system when you are in maintenance, or you need to have a higher availability. This is one of the problems there. The expectation is to have a 100% availability, but it's never can do this kind of thing. We are now trying to reach around 95, 98% availability. The system that we are using, his name is VISIR. VISIR is a visual instrument system in reality. It's a system developed in Sweden, in the VTH system in Blekinge. And we have now around 8 systems deployed in Europe and 1 in India. And we are now deploying 5 in South America. These systems allows real-time users between 16 and 64 working in real time with the same components, with electronics components, and doing real measurements and real physical equipment there. All the equipment is controlled by live view, in this case, server software, and the wiring is doing in a computer with PXA system there. This is not a simulation software. We need an interface, of course, to work with it, but when you are working with it, you are measuring real inductors, real resistors, you are doing real transistors, and you are working with real equipment on the other side. This is one of the things that we're trying to put really clear to the students. This is not a simulator, it's a real component in the other side. And you have to make some multiplexing of all the work in there to allow multi-time working for them. VCIR is not an instructor, VCIR is not, of course, a way to do things. VCIR is only the equipment that you are using to have the real experiment online. This is a fast image of the systems. You have here the part of the cabling of the systems, the user working it, a video server a web server to work with it, the database, and finally the place where each one of the users that is working concurrently, they are making each own connections on the system there. The baddest part of the system is the interface, because the interface is exactly the one that they have a simulator, because this is only interface to a computer and the interface to our resistors in the other side. Then the students can handle all the equipments, they handle the oscilloscope, they handle the frequency, they handle all the measurements there. We have here the oscilloscope, we have the measurements, and the good part is the last one is the real equipment that is on the other side. We have there the boards, the boards where we have the multiplexing equipment, and in this case we put some other black boards that we put a more complex systems, electronic systems, for the user to be working with it. The idea is that they see that they are working with real systems, and when they are hitting the components and they are working with them, they will see that the parameters of the system are changing for the heat or for the light and so on there. We integrate this inside the UNED Comma. UNED Comma was a system that UNED, in my university, we have 7 years ago, working with MOOCs. We choose this in this moment, this kind of system, because there was the available for our university and was really easy to do that. Now we are changing the systems to go to OpenEDX for the future product. We are making the upgrading to OpenEDX now. But we're working for 5 years with UNED Comma. UNED Comma try to push the system there. In our case, we have a badge, we have credentials for paying, certificates for paying and in-person examination for the people that like to have a real certificate or the work inside it. And we have on the UNED a curator and a facilitator to try to move and to try to have more the people working. The access is always open and free. This is one of the things that we have in mind, but as we are starting to put the course in a basic electronics, we put as a requirement, not a real fixed requirement, but as a requirement that the students need to know a little bit of electronics. Because we are not trying to teach electronics, we are trying to teach practical use of the electronic systems. This is one of the problems that we have at the beginning, and we have the typical rejection rate or the dropout rate of a MOOC around 50% of the people, because the people used to register anything, and finally when they see that they have to need to know a little bit in electronics, they are completely lost in there. And we are trying to check the things inside the remote lab, the scalability, how much students we can have at the same time working with the system, and to be involved this year in this massive environment. And of course, we are trying to put the competences and the electronics things and analysis to be a part of the system there. We did the first integration of remote labs inside a MOOC, in this case, in the world. We are working with this for 4 times. We'll see the results later on. And we're trying to develop this kind of courses to be really, really attractive for the students to work in it. And we develop all the courses there. We are trying to have the students mainly involved inside the long-term methodology. We put at the beginning some simulation and some methodology to work inside the electronic competences, practical electronic competence, using the system they like to use for simulation, but later having on the difference between the simulation and the real components trying to be using inside the VCIR. And trying, of course, to be really analytics to compare the results between the simulation and the real system there. We developed the MOOC in 8 modules. In the first time that we offered the course, there was expected to do it in 2.5 months, more or less, 2 weeks for each one, 1.5 weeks for each one of the modules. And in the last version that we offered the courses, we are reducing it in the contents, trying to be in around less than 1 week, around 6-7 weeks for all the course together for the students there. This is a little bit image of the system and the booking system that we have to develop. Didn't work. They don't like to go out. Yes. Finally, we put the system on work. We start the MOOC 4 years ago, and we put then to try to determine how much scalable should be the system using inside it. We have in mind that a maximum of 60 concurrent users should be working with the Busier remote lab, and we start to put and have a lot of stressing system there. We put, for example, only one user, 5 minutes, measuring all the system there, and we have the response time from the system around 80 milliseconds. We put, in this case, 5 users, and the system will be going down for 300 milliseconds. And when we put around 30 users working concurrently with the systems, we have around 2 seconds of the response times on the system to each one of them. And we put this, in this case, around 25, the number of users that we can put managing the system. Then we integrate this inside the booking systems, and we put for the necessary settings 2 simulations for each one of the students, 16 stores for the course variable, 60 minutes, 1 hour for each one of the students, and we have around 384 turns that we can offer to the students every day. We can increase it, but it was enough for our courses. This is the profile of the students that we have. When we offer the courses, we have around students mainly from 20 to 60 years old, mainly a little bit aging, about 40% is the maximum, around 30% of the students. And one of the bad parts of the thing is that the experience of the students in electronics was higher as they are older. This is normal too, because they are more fluent or more experienced in electronics in this case as they are older people. And we put in the age of the people putting the employment and unemployment. We have major part of our students, some people is working there because we have a lot of, we are in my university, we have a lot, around 240,000 students, and some of them was included in the courses because they saw the website and they are included there. But the major part of the students was students, and of course unemployed, and some part of them are working people and student people there. The first edition we did 4 years ago, we have more than 3,600 students, and we have around the dropout rate, as you see it, around, we finished in the courses around 2%, 3% of the students was finishing all the courses without accreditations at the last time. In the second edition, 3 years ago, we have more or less 1,300 students, and we increased a bit because we refurbishing the course and we're trying to have in mind a system that was more looking the students' orientation, trying to be more involved in the system there. And in the third edition, the last year, we have 2,400 students, and we maintain more or less the finishing time of the students around the 8-9% of the students, and the dropout rate it was low in there. This is the dropout. We see that at the beginning we have around 50% of the students they was out because they didn't interest after they are trying to see what the system can afford to them. And later on in the model 2, they decreased a lot of the dropout because it was a real theoretical and only methodology model. But after the number 3, we have the typical exponential rate of dropout of the system because the people was losing in the way there. This is another interesting view about the percentage of the students that have some knowledge of electrical and electronics engineering. Near half of them don't have any idea of this kind of systems, and the other 40% are really aware of electrical and electronics, and around 20% have information about some part of electrical system. Having in mind the test, at the beginning of the courses, the students don't have any idea about what the remote lab should do and what the remote lab should be reliable or not, and what's the result they can obtain it. And at the end of the system, they are really aware of that they are really reliable systems, they are really good, and they can use in any moment, in any order. This is more or less the students that finished doing the last test, about 65% of the people that finish the course like to repeat it, and because they believe they are really, really interesting and they can do it in this case, and only 1% they are not interested about to doing out of the system. And about the real final conclusion is that if we put to the students that try to compare, if they are doing a traditional lab inside with the traditional in-person labs, or virtual labs, or simulators, or remote labs, they have in mind, more than half of the people, has in mind that the VCIR as a remote lab is as much as relevant and as much as interesting for learning activities as the real practical they have in the lab. This is the thing that we are really have in mind. This is the reason that we maintain that the best approach to do this is try to combine all the systems together and not be only one of the systems, not only simulation, not only virtual, not only remote, or not only in person. And this is too another thing that is really interesting about the remote labs. We have, for example, we have 3 million access to the function generator, or we have around 1,200,000 access to one of the resistors. This is impossible to replicate in a real lab, because you will burn it and you will have to change it in any case. We don't need to change any component, as this is the real value of the remote labs. As a conclusion, the system VCIR has shown that it's really able to perform an activity with a lot of students in massive environment. We have to redesign every year. We redesign a little bit the course, trying to be more attractive and trying to have in mind mainly the problems that we are looking for the people that is sometimes they are lost in there. And we are trying to maintain this kind of remote labs that should be really interesting. We have some projects working in this kind of things. We have 2 projects from the Erasmus Plus. One is VCIR Plus that is working as I told you, with South America system to extend the network that we have. And we have a new project 1 month ago, named is Pilar, that the idea is to try to have a federation of the VCIR systems to offer the same activities to all the students there. And thank you very much, and if you have any question.
Questions for Manuel?
I killed it.
I have to say, could you explain again the difference between, how did people select the different components?
Yes.
Was there a robot involved? Could they plug stuff?
Yes, the system mainly is as a remote system with multiplexers. Then you allow to the system to have a bunch of electronic components, some resistors, some inductors, some transistors, some amplifiers, and the students with a software can select any one of them and put in a circuit. At the same time that one person is doing this circuit, other students are doing with the same components a different system. And you can have until 16 to 64 students doing different circuits with the same components in a different way, each one of them.
But I don't get, you said it's not a virtual lab, it's a real lab.
It's a real lab, yes.
Is somebody sitting there plugging the stuff
No,
together?
it's a multiplexing system. It's an automatic multiplexing system. It's basically more reliable.
Okay, I don't know
It's
much
an automatic
about
multiplexing.
it. Okay.
Yes, the good thing is
So
that
the connections are automatically
yes,
done and
yes.
redone.
It's a high time, real access to the system. The good part is that you only do one time the net list of the system, and any student can have different circuits with the same circuit that you offer. Yeah. This is the reason that you don't have to change the resistors after 1 million access to them, and they are continuing working there.
And are you running also via the MOOC also into scalability problems at the moment? So do you have more than, you said 64?
Yes, now we have around, the optimum place is around 24, 25 students at the same time.
Because of performance
Yes, for the time of the answering time, yes.
Okay.
If you like to have this, the idea of the project Pilar is try to federate all the systems that we have and trying to offer in parallel, transparent to the student where they are working with each one.
I just trying also to make a connection between the presentations. Another thing would be that you have a kind of, you have a reserve system and that groups allocate.
Yes, the booking system, one of the part of the more interesting part is the development of the booking system that we add as a plugin, in this case as a web service, to the MOOC side.
Okay. Other questions for Manuel? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have 15 minutes more for an overall discussion across the papers. Anybody wants to make a start? Yes?
So
So what's interesting is, I guess, as we move into the MOOC space, we're struggling with group formations, group support, perhaps tools for allowing us to assign members of the MOOC to groups. So I wonder if it's the outcome that we need to worry about. So what are the groups doing? So for example, in Danielle's presentation, it's project-based learning, problem-based learning. So obviously the groups have a deliverable. They have something that they need to develop, design. In the FutureLearn, it sounds like it's more a structured discussion based on a topic. So perhaps there's no final document or deliverable. Maybe they ought to have a facilitator who might summarize their key points or themes from the discussion, and then sort of maybe post it outside of the discussion group, as you mentioned. In the VISR, perhaps it's more about allowing the different permutations of connecting and figuring out whether they're useful in the engineering sense. So I wonder, how might we design dashboards or tools that could support the different outcomes of why we do groups, at such a large scale. And I wonder if there's already an existing tool. I don't know, perhaps there is, and but they seem to be more. Some have argued for profiling, creating profiles, and maybe getting the groups with profiles. FutureLearn's randomization seems to have worked in that sense. So I wonder, it's a huge research issue in MOOCs. I think the group learning process, and so, but there's so many different. I think the outcome of why do we have the group, and what are they supposed to do, is really important.
I would like to extend on that. For me, it's also an open question, maybe also to you. Do we just transfer experiences from social psychology in terms also of group size to the MOOC environment? Does it make a difference if you put together 5 or up to 20? Where's the next amount of people? So I'm also, at the moment, I think it's still based on little experience. What is also a good group size to put together? Do you have any reply to that?
So I think it's a good place to start to ask what are groups for on MOOCs. And when we started doing that, we found that there was a space of possibilities, and we tried to explore that space of possibilities deliberately, explicitly. So there was team groups, as you would say, there was these discussion-focused groups or activity-focused groups. Then there are other design decisions like how do you allocate people, should it be at random, what should the group size be? With those, the great thing about MOOCs is that you can run A/B tests. So you can run comparisons because you've got a number of runs of the courses, you've got a number of courses that are being running at the same time. So we're going to be doing that. One of the things we are going to be looking at is trying to expand the group size, whether 40 people or 50 people in a group, because it's a trade-off, because you don't want to have too large a group because it then is just like a discussion alongside the content. It's too unmanageable. You don't want to have it too small because there isn't enough activity and it fades away. So that's one of the parameters we've got to look at. But the other real one, I think, is around facilitation and structure. And what sort of guidance do you give for structure?
And yeah, there was one group.
Yeah, I think still we had entirely different reasons for forming groups, and so if we are trying to envision problem-based learning, we would envision different possibilities. I think what our main impression is that there is no single right way to do this. And what I felt was really powerful was that our groups had a number of decisions that they could take themselves. And so we did allow them to form around common interests, and some formed around being in the same university, and some formed around being second language speakers from all over the world. So similarly, I don't feel that there is an optimal group size, that maybe even within the same design, different groups might prefer to be different size. So I think we need to give the participants a role in this as well.
Is another comment?
Yes, about your question about just simply, transferring what we know from research into MOOCs, I think that's, we gotta be careful with that. We know that MOOCs, are different, and we already know that there are a lot of factors, psychological factors that we assumed would simply transfer, like motivation, other issues that didn't. But I think it's interesting right now that we're talking about groups in MOOCs. A couple of years ago, we were talking about video production and how long the video should be, and whether we should put prompts in the videos. I think with more experiments, they came up to, I think, 7 minutes or 5 minutes of video or stuff like that. So I think with more, we need to experiment more with, different group sizes, and we need to share more so we can make comparisons and, figure out what works and what did not.
I think it's also an interesting pattern that always talking about open, there is also value in closed in the environment. So that is also becomes more valid. I also see a line in terms of scalability in both themes. And I ask myself, is there also some experience here with doing peer assessments of groups? So that the product of a group again is peer assessed by another group? We did that. Yours?
Yes.
Mine?
We are working, for example, now inside one of the projects about the possibility to have a peer collaboration system to integrate the remote lab inside the system, and all the people that is attending to this kind of session can share information with it and with the tutor or not that will be there. They can have a peer, the students working together with the system, or they can have only a tutor that will manage them. And it is to try to manage it, but we are developing this kind of systems to try to allow this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, because I agree that if we don't do anything about outcome, we also never know if the group is working or not, and if it produces something, and so on and so on. Danielle, you wanted to comment?
It was explicitly our design that every assignment would be peer reviewed by other groups. And we saw that some people heavily engaged in that, even went beyond and reviewed more than the 3 assigned to them.
But then really as a group, did they meet and talked about the assignment, or was it individuals from the group?
No, it was individuals from the group were peer reviewing products of other groups. And in some of the groups, we saw that they pulled in those peer reviews and started discussing what others said about their assignment, and tried to get lessons learned from that.
Do you still want to?
Thank you. Your discussion today left me more curious and a little more troubled.
Very good.
I realize that there are a host of things that I don't know, and I'm in the middle of designing a MOOC right now, and this is around teams in continuous learning, which means looking at elements such as culture, elements such as conflict, elements such as group dynamics in a virtual world. So it's almost a meta. And I will try and frame a question. I'm at the beginning of it. I'm not at the outcome. I'm at the beginning of it. And the question I'm asking myself and the 4 faculty members I'm involved with is, how do we intentionally design for a positive group dynamics in the virtual world, where we cannot control the strangers like us in the room, who are choosing to be in a room. So there's this huge choice that is being made. How can we create elements of design in the way we are designing MOOCs? It's a very broad question, I understand. Please help.
I think it's a very good question, and taking a design perspective on MOOCs is exactly what we should be doing. I want to come back on, Danielle, about giving learners more power to manage the formation and structure of their own groups. I think for some circumstances that's good. If you've got problem-based learning in teams with experienced learners. What we were trying to do was to take people who perhaps it was their first online learning experience and to get them started in groups as quickly as possible. So in order to be able to take those sort of meta-level decisions about how you should join a group, whether you should join a group, how it should be structured, you need to have a certain level of self-awareness, which perhaps our learners didn't have, and you have to take time out to do that. And we wanted to get people engaged in the task as quickly as possible. So I think there's a trade-off here between giving learners more power to have discussions about how they manage their groups and getting straight into, as easily as possible, into the group activity.
You wanted to read?
I just want to say that just from this discussion, I mean, I've like listed all the factors. So for example, it's group pedagogy, if you will. I mean, maybe we're looking at group pedagogy. And so there's who's facilitating, do you want to group them based on common interests? What's the size of the group going to be? What's the outcome of the group assignment? How are you going to assess them? Are you going to do a charter in the beginning? Do you want to allow them to manage your group? I can imagine the dashboard already for MOOCs designers or educators, allowing us to sort of assemble what we want to do, and based on that, boom, it's come up and say, okay, here's what you should do with your groups, and that's what you should have in the MOOC. That would be cool. Let's do that.
I would like to add something to that list, and also partly in a reply to the question above. I mean, there are so many factors also, and it depends also pretty much what is the actual task of the group. Because we have some experience also with peer support, so you have an anonymous environment, you have a peer support algorithm, and you also need to take care that you put together the people with the right zone of proximal development in terms of Vygotsky, so that you don't have beginners and absolute experts in one group, and you don't have this zone of proximal development in between. And the other thing is that you also don't overload people, and this has to do also with the role and the group dynamics, that you always have the expert taking decisions and so on. So I think it's a pretty complex task that we need to do. I think we have time for one last question or comment. Yes, you had another one, right?
Yeah, I had a question about the visualization of the activity in the dashboards. I was looking at the one that you put up there that shows sort of the trend lines, and it was really interesting, but I was wondering what you thought about when you iterate, what enhanced visibility are you going to want to see? Because that was really helpful, but the ones that were trending up could have been arguing about Brexit. They could have been arguing about a whole bunch of stuff. Not necessarily task at hand. So what deeper visualizations do you want to see when you go around the next step?
I think it's a very good point. I mean, that was already the second iteration. The first iteration, we just showed some very general statistics, like the number of people taking part, the number of people who had left, and the educators wanted to see trends. I think, yes, the next is going to get some sort of semantic analysis. Are they on topic? Are they off topic? And I think that's possible now. So maybe looking at the topic focusedness of the groups, and it would be a great research project to see if we can come up with some metrics of is the discussion focused on the topic.
And maybe you also need to add at some point in time, depending on the amount of the groups, kind of signaling system that these groups need attention, something like that.
That's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.